Okay, now that I have a few more spoons lately, we're going to do a series on on articles around higher education. I'm not really sure like what the outer limits of this are going to be. I have at the moment, I think, 5 articles that I'll start with those videos, but it could expand because a lot of the concepts are going to relate to my dissertation around higher education in prison as well. So welcome! This is going to be so much fun. I find this stuff so interesting. So I hope you do too. Okay, it's been a very long time. But welcome back. We're going to do a series on videos about universities and lots of different things. But I'm going to do individual videos for the articles and then one bigger video that kind of links them all and talks about overarching systems or ideologies or whatever, which individual articles we'll also discuss, but I'll talk about why they're all related. So this first video we're going to do is called The Corporate Link to University from Social Project to Market Force by Janice, Newsome, and it was published in 1998. So like the study subject is the universities in Canada, but for this video we're operating from the assumption that you can generalize to universities within the United States and probably most Western countries. So like I said, in the name of the article, like it's the topic is the corporatization of universities, which according to Newsome comes with like 2 main aspects. So first aspect, and this is a direct quote, is new kinds of contractual relationships in which some level of financial support to a university program or research project is exchanged for an opportunity for a corporate donor to exercise influence over and or benefit from specific research and or educational activities. So, I just realized it's like really hot in my apartment. Some examples of this listed in the article are the development of marketable products that can be patented or licensed, which one of my friends actually talked about recently, like their ideal career goals would be just, there was a word, but I don't remember what it was, but like just strictly research, not research that has like an intended market purpose, but funding for those types of positions is basically non-existent. Other examples were displaying corporate logos on things, so like on a presentation or maybe in your textbook, or if you work in a lab, probably on some of the lab equipment, which also relates to the next example, just showing equipment to students and other clients through the classroom, or through like events on campus, like using campus as a way to market your own products. I think we're all familiar with this next one, naming buildings or like a wing of a new building, like donating enough money that you have something substantial on campus named after you. Creating entirely new programs. So the next article we're going to do isn't about corporatization, it's about the militarization of education, and they talk about that in like the relation of like the creation of things like area studies. But obviously that can happen through corporate donors as well, not just the military. And then representation within the curriculum, like being able to dictate what is included in curriculum as well as what is excluded from curriculum. Okay, and so the second aspect of corporatization is again, and this is a direct quote from the article, so adoption by universities of the modus operandi, criteria, and objectives of private sector corporations. So basically being profit motivated. So some examples in the article include education and research as products to be consumed, for-profit research that bids for contracts, which means that your research findings are likely going to align with the goals and perspectives of the funder. A good example of that is ExxonMobil, who funded research, climate denial research, where 97% of scientists were saying that human activities, specifically capitalism, are contributing to climate change, whereas there was that 3%, and later it's found that those scientists were funded by oil companies to refute everyone else's climate science. So next example, the provision of academic support activities through designated cost units that offer their service to other campus units on a fee for service basis. So that one's a direct quote, and some examples of that would be like colleges that have to rent buildings from the larger university, even though obviously technically they're one big entity. Another example would be like outsourcing why can't I think of the word? It was my job. Custodial services. So either they can be through the university, which you're still charged like per building that is cleaned, but even again, it's all the same institution, or buildings can outsource the custodial labor to companies like Goodwill, because generally those are cheaper than paying the university to come and clean your building, which I find wild. And then the last example was trademarks. So, scholarship on this generally says, like a lot of scholars theorize or insinuate, that these changes, so the increase in corporate ties and corporate management models, have been initiated outside of the university. But in this article, Newsome outlines how through her career she has seen the universities are actively participating in that transition. So it's generally explained as like this one-way relationship, like the world happens and universities react, but is that actually the case? So Newsome explains that explaining it that way, in that one-way relationship, and that like it's the outside that influences the university, and then constraints are put on the university and it has to react or adapt in some way, is mystifying. And she says it, this is a quote, "It's mystifying because it camouflages the extent to which the university itself is implicated in the very social, political, and economic forces to which it then must accommodate." So it implies that we cannot name and then challenge the forces that act upon the university, because there's these abstract outside things that happen that we are then forced to, or academics, staff at universities, students, faculty, are required to respond to. So the article aims to demystify the belief that universities only respond or adapt to outside influence, but rather have been active participants in the corporatization of universities in Canada. And like I said at the beginning, we're operating here under the impression, like the assumption, that the same thing can be applied to the United States. I think the other articles I talk about, I'm trying to think if there are any that are outside the United States. I don't think there are. So Newsome is making the case that the corporatization has changed universities from a source of public good through the production and dissemination of social knowledge, to now prioritizing market knowledge, while still receiving public funding. So the sources of these changes can be identified from both within and outside of the university. So again, through a lot of the other articles, there's this discussion around the idea that universities were supposed to play this like democratizing role within society. So one, to be a model of what democracy should look like through things like faculty like governance, and just like teaching, modeling civic engagement outside of the university, which is another very interesting topic, in the fact that like I know some large universities have this idea that like to perpetuate this idea that like civic engagement is strictly voting. And so like I think that would tie into this, but we'll get to that in the larger bringing it all together video. So Newsome is making the case that this corporatization, just kidding, we just read that paragraph. After World War II, the expansion of higher education was framed as both I'm explaining it right here, an economic good in terms of offering opportunities for social, political, and economic mobility, as well as an exemplar of democratic governance and promoting democratic participation among citizens. So with its prevailing doctrine of meritocracy, the university of the 1960s and the early 1970s could be viewed as having staged a contest between two objectives of serving the needs of the economy on the one hand and contributing to the political project of advancing democratic sensibilities and practices on the other. That's per Newsome's words. So now Newsome argues that the balance of these two intended purposes of higher education have transitioned to prioritize the market through the actions of the university as well as outside influences. Newsome explains that the shift from faculty-student governance to the current managerial style control through her own experiences as a faculty member over 20 decades. No, 2 decades. One of the things she mentions is the need to modify research to fit into the most recently announced policy objectives, and I think this relates to a grant writing class I took recently, where we discussed making sure that your research projects align with the funding sources if you expect to get grant funded, which is essential if you plan to have a career as a faculty member, like a tenure track faculty, especially at a research university. So Newsome defines managerialism as the structures and procedures for decision making are they democratic and voted on by stakeholders in the university, such as faculty, staff, and students, or are they made by administrative officials with little or no input from other university members? Are they quality motivated or quantity motivated? This has definitely been a topic in the news in relation to student protests on campus. A lot of faculty are making the case that, like, if universities were still functioning under the faculty management model, faculty governance, that's the word, administrators would not have been able to call the police on students the way that they did. So Newsome notes that the start of some of these changes stem from the public funding cuts for higher education, which over time, as universities had to cut budgets and programs, led to the belief that universities are simply mismanaged. So initially it was just like, they're fine, they can take these minor budget cuts and nothing's going to change, which is obviously questionable in itself. But then as it continued over time, as governments were like, oh, see, they're doing fine, we can just keep cutting their funding, they're like, actually, maybe universities are just being mismanaged. Because those budget cuts led to things like cuts in programs or cuts in staffing, and there's no way that you can do those things and not impact the academic quality or integrity of the institution. So the language of efficiency started being used to dictate how well a university met its fiscal. I'm great at reading, I promise. So the language of efficiency started being used to dictate how well a university met its fiscal goals. Debates over university decisions were labeled problematic and were in turn centralized to a singular administration, away from the previous collegial, like more democratic approach that was previously used. So while I cannot speak on the discourse that is happening at universities in the US in the 1990s, I can say that same conversation is happening right now in terms of budget cuts, not filling open administrative positions, also cutting GA positions, so graduate research associates or graduate teaching associates, or there are actually graduate administrative associates as well, cutting those funding, which is how students fund their programs. Like, it's one of the ways students that don't have enough money to just pay their tuition, that's how they pay for their schooling, is through those positions, and then the university will cut those positions and then complain that their enrollments are down. So universities will be doing those things while somehow maintaining the belief that everyone within the university is capable of doing more with less, and that it will not affect the quality of the product being offered to the students. So decisions about which courses to continue, which research to propose, which programs and departments receive funding are all framed through concepts like efficiency and productivity. So again, we've completely lost sight of like what other purposes or benefits higher education might have outside of economic terms. Another consequence of budget cuts for universities was the belief that private and public partnerships were mutually beneficial, so providing the university with money and the company with expertise. I think, I already mentioned this example, but I think a good example of how badly that can go would be that ExxonMobil research. Newsome also discusses the dangers of private companies and organizations that gain legitimacy through their affiliation with universities, but are not subject to the same rules and regulations. So her example was something, again, in Canada, so I don't remember what it was, but it was this idea that, like, some space tech program became affiliated with a university without any input from students or faculty from the university, and then has this reputation because it is affiliated with the university, but is not required to follow the same, like, rules as the university, because it is technically a separate entity, while using university, not products, what is the word? Resources? Yeah. So they benefit from the public funds of universities, and then use the knowledge produced or the products produced as private profit. So I apparently forgot to put like a concluding little paragraph here, so that's awesome. But that last part is a thing I see talked about a lot in leftist spaces in terms of things that innovation is publicly funded and the profits are privatized. So public discourse loves to talk about how capitalism breeds innovation, but it's actually public funding in public organizations and institutions that advance technology, and those advancements are then privatized for a company to make profit. If anyone's interested, I can find specific examples because I don't remember off the top of my head, but basically the whole point here is that like a lot of people are making the argument that originally universities in the West were intended to be a public good, that they were supposed to serve as places for democratic participation, or at least a model for that could then be extended to everybody, and economic benefits in terms of giving people ladders to social and economic mobility. I would argue that was not actually ever the case, but it is definitely significantly more clear now that they serve market interests, not public good. And one of the things we'll talk about when we link them all together is neoliberalism, which a lot of our authors talk about, how like one of the main drives of neoliberalism is the privatization of everything, every aspect of life, including education, and how that negatively impacts the potential benefits of education. So again, when you're altering your grant proposal to make sure that it aligns with the newest policy initiative or the corporation or foundation that is providing the funding, then we're going to keep missing pieces that are critical to resolving the problems that we just keep researching. I can tell you, like I said, as a person that's been affiliated with a Big Ten university for 3 years now, that a lot of these conversations are exactly what they are not getting better, they're exacerbating even more, while people are still holding on to the belief that somehow this magical funding is going to reappear someday. Who knows, right? I'm not a fortune teller. I'm operating from the assumption that that will not happen. Also, I'm really glad that I separated these because we're already at 17 minutes on this one, and this is just one article, and this is an article that I've been promising a video for on my social media for probably like a year now. So I finally did it. I'm counting that as my major accomplishment for the day, and I look forward to the next one, which, like I said, is about the militarization of education. It's gonna be amazing. Okay, bye. Go forth and do good things.